Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Tiffany Patterson, and I'm the CEO for United Ways of Texas. And we just appreciate your interest in what happened at the legislative session and engagement as a nonprofit sector in the advocacy world. We believe that every nonprofit has a powerful voice and should get involved in advocacy to help advance its mission. Advocacy shapes the public debate about issues that affect nonprofits and is the #1 way nonprofits can focus attention on the issues they care about and bring about real change for the people and causes that they serve. We are a proud partner of OneStar in this work, and I'm going to hand it over to Chris Bugsby to also do a question, to do a welcome.
Thank you, Tiffany. I'm just excited to be here with all of you, and just to echo Tiffany's comments, just thank you for all of you in the nonprofit sector, the incredible work you do every day. We know advocacy is an important part of our work. It's sometimes not as easy to understand what quite happened during the legislative session. So we're grateful to United Ways and to Ashley for sharing her expertise. So thank you. And we're really excited. Encourage you, I know Ashley will mention this too, but encourage you to follow what's going on with Texas Nonprofit Strong. And so txnonprofits.org, be sure to get signed up. Encourage your friends, because you probably are signed up if you're here. Encourage your friends in the nonprofit sector to do that as well, so they can start partnering with us in this initiative. Thanks, and I'll turn it over to Ashley.
Great, thanks so much, Chris, and thank you everyone for joining. I know summertime is busy for everyone, but a lot has happened and a lot is continuing to happen in Austin at our state capitol, and we just really want to be a resource to our nonprofit sector and keep you guys informed of key policy discussions and issues that could potentially impact the nonprofit sector. Before we get started, just a few housekeeping items. We are, if you could, please don't forget to share your name, organization, and would love to hear from those, especially those that are not in this hot weather in Texas, where you're joining us from, to help us connect during this webinar. And as a reminder, this will be recorded. We will share it out with all attendees as a follow-up to this event, as well as any additional resources or items that we talk about today. For any questions, we encourage folks to use the chat box. And if we have time today, I'm breaking up some different opportunities for Q&A. We'll use the raise your hand feature and maybe try and get you unmuted. If we have time, I may do some polling, but I think maybe we'll just keep it, since we have a lot to cover, we may not have time to really dive deep, but this is really just a first initial way that we can get you guys up to speed and get you connected. And just kind of overall, we really hope you leave today with a really high level and a better understanding of the movement or lack of movement on priority issues affecting nonprofits and the communities they serve during the 88th regular session. We hope that you'll be more empowered to use this information, to engage in advocacy, to work with partners on systemic improvements in your communities, and most importantly, be energized for our future work together and take action opportunities. Chris and Tiffany, feel free to correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel like this is all so new for us, and we're just kind of dipping our toe in this work and being a voice and engaging the nonprofit sector on critical policy issues and systemic issues. And so this is really, we would love your feedback and thoughts and hearing on what's most important to you.
I think you captured it, Ashley. Perfect. Thank you.
Great. So just to ground us before we talk about what happened this session and why, we tracked any particular bills or budget items, for those who may be new and for those who helped us craft these, and I will admit this may be the outdated version, so we have a new one online. We want to share our policy principles. This really provided a lens for us to track bills that were important to our network and was informed by our Texas Nonprofit Strong Advocacy Network. These principles really highlight, were developed to help guide policymakers on how to support nonprofits during the 88th legislative session. They weren't true policy priorities. They were just things that we all agreed upon, and we think that policymakers should take in consideration when discussing budget priorities or specific policy priorities this legislative session. It was great that we use this as a tool during our Texas Nonprofit Strong Capital Day. A big thanks to OneStar for being able to get this out to all of our legislative offices. And I think, it's a kind of a first education and positioning piece for us as advocates on behalf of the sector. And with this, we really wanted to urge policymakers to consider these following items and ensure the nonprofit impact, ensure that any policy proposals they were thinking about took in consideration the needs and challenges faced by our nonprofit sector. In the chat box, I'm going to include the link to the actual document. This was just a high level version of it for those who may not have seen it. And moving forward, we really hope maybe in the next legislative session, we can have some more specific policy priorities and get some sign-on, use it as a sign-on opportunity for you guys and for this network. So now to get into the weeds and what happened this session. I kind of need to provide some big context and some overall summaries on what happened this regular session. But as many of you guys know, the 80th legislative session kicked off in January with a $32.7 billion budget surplus, which was historic and really exciting for most advocates, and afforded state legislators the opportunity to really go beyond the status quo and really meaningfully address critical areas and challenges, including, big systems like healthcare, child welfare, the challenges around the teacher shortage, big issues that I would say have been neglected for a very long time. So there was a lot of energy and a lot of excitement and hope at the beginning of session. State leadership, including our Lieutenant Governor, Governor Abbott, as well as Speaker Phelan, laid out their priorities, and there were a lot of differences, but they had some alignment on issues like book bans, teacher pay, tax relief, which now they're on different pages, but at the beginning of session there were some shared priorities there that really helped shape and guide the policy discussions over the course of the 140-day regular session. By March, y'all, we had more bills filed than any other session that I can remember. But unfortunately, there was a smaller percentage of actual bills that passed and made it across the finish line. After it began, over, I think about 1,200 bills actually passed, and that includes some key conservative and Democratic priorities. The session, unfortunately, the session though ended in a historic way, in a dramatic way, with the impeachment of our Attorney General by our Texas House, and no movement on two key priorities of our Governor of Government Abbott, which included property tax and school vouchers, which then forced us into our first special session, and as of yesterday, now our second special session. Because of this, and because of lack of movement and the lack of accomplishment on many big items, including including education funding and school vouchers, we really expect at least another special session on those two issues in particular later this summer. And I think advocates are hopeful that we can get some momentum on those key education priorities during that special session. I can't gloss over, the budget. While it's not sexy, the budget literally is the only piece of legislation that the legislature must pass during our 140-day biennial session. And we know, y'all know this, that budget decisions and spending decisions affect all Texans, and including, the issues that nonprofits are really mobilizing around, and the constituents and individuals that nonprofits serve, and can affect and can impact the operations of our nonprofits. This session, lawmakers passed about a $321 billion budget for the next biennium, the 2024-25 biennium, a little bit of increase from past sessions, when we actually kind of break down the numbers on what was actually spent last biennium, not a huge change. We left a lot of money on the table, and some of those key areas that policymakers put investments towards, and frankly, were long overdue, included state salary increases for state workers, wage increases, minimal wage increases, I must add, for home health workers, who you guys know care for our most vulnerable, broadband, which I'm going to talk about later, and a slew of other issues. So that are really important. So, you know, we were glad to see some investment in some critical areas that really strengthen and bolster communities. We just had some disappointments as well. Other budget highlights I wanted to mention, because I think it sets the stage for the specific bills that moved this session. I want to give the legislature some credit that they did increase the state's investment in mental health. However, there was just some big disappointments around children's mental health, in particular school mental health, funding to support student mental health. So some disappointment there, but there was some additional investments made in the infrastructure of our state mental health system. Unfortunately, the legislature actually didn't address one of the biggest challenges that our state mental health system is facing, which is they may have open beds to take people, to serve people, but they don't have staff to be able to allow to accept new admissions. The legislature did not address that challenge, that providers kept telling them that that was their biggest issue, that they needed investments in their staff capacity to be able to serve and to be able to provide services with those beds. Also, there was some additional investment in local mental health and community mental health. Most kind of biggest, and it's made all kind of the rounds with the media, is the budget did include that $17.6 billion property tax relief. Of that, we have about $12 billion that is contingent upon a property tax bill that is yet to pass. That is yet to find, that yet the House or Senate have found agreement on, and that's why we're in our second special session. So we have that $12 billion that is part of that negotiation and deal that did not move during the regular session. So that's high level budget. Budget advocacy, I think, is critical, and frankly, I think many advocates and nonprofits don't do enough in budget advocacy, and we know how critical that is. So in terms of specific bills, y'all, I'm not going to go through everything, but I thought there were some bills that y'all may not be aware of, and that may directly relate to the work that you do or the population that you serve. There were several bills that were filed and several bills that passed that may be of interest to our Texas nonprofit sector. I'm not going to go through everything, but of note, House Bill 456 by Representative Craddock. This may not impact any of our Austin area or urban area nonprofits, but Representative Craddock championed a bill that exempts royalty interest owned by a charitable organization from property taxes. I would imagine this impacts nonprofits in his region, that Midland, Odessa area, more than others. But, you know, I think this is, you know, any support that we can get is great for nonprofits. Also, House Bill 1024 by Representative Thompson. This is a really interesting bill that I had to do some research on. This raised the maximum authorized value of a residential dwelling that's offered or awarded through a charitable raffle. Last legislative session, the legislature raised the maximum value of prizes for everything else other than residential dwellings that may be awarded from these raffles. And so they came back this session, addressed it, and they kind of they raised that cap that hasn't been changed since 2005, and we know values have gone up for cost of new homes, construction, home reselling has gone up, and so it did raise that cap for the maximum value that for dwellings that can be awarded. Other nonprofit capacity volunteer, let me see, did I skip? Oh, bingo. So bingo is always, I feel like there's always a million bingo bills each legislative session. And I mean, I understand why, but it's always interesting because I feel like this doesn't necessarily impact a lot of our sector, but there were some changes made to our charitable bingo laws this session, and Senate Bill 643 actually incorporates some language developed in consultation with the Texas Lottery Commission to provide an increase in the authorized temporary licenses to conduct bingo, and to eliminate like an annual bingo license that's required. So it just makes it a little bit easier for nonprofits to be able to provide bingo and help support, the operational needs of our nonprofits. And it did raise a cap also on prizes from $2,500 to $5,000. I mean, so that's not, for those who use this as a revenue driver to support, your mission and your work, this could be just to help you a bit in being able to draw potential donors to your organization. So I wanted to make sure I covered digital inclusion, and I know this may not be a priority that you guys have thought about, but there's a lot of movement, there's a lot happening, especially with some of the federal money that's coming down to our state. Expected at least 3.3 billion coming to our state to help local communities and states address digital connectivity barriers, including broadband infrastructure. United Ways of Texas, in partnership with Texas 2036 and Texas Rural Funders, has really been a leading voice on all things digital equity and inclusion. And we were happy to continue to move. We had some big wins last legislative session with HB 5 that created the Broadband Development Office, but we needed to continue to move forward and make some increased investments. And why I think nonprofits should really care about this is I've actually looked at some national surveying done that shows that many nonprofits are really struggling with access to quality, broadband, high speed. Many of them lack the digital skills and access to hardware needed to be able to work and work in a digital world. And we know more and more that donors and providers are working in in the digital space. And so we must ensure that nonprofits have those skills, have the infrastructure and ability to be able to implement connectivity within their operations. So we continue to move on this, knowing how important it is to not just our United Ways, but our nonprofit sector. And we're so glad to see that that last bullet, House Bill 9, passed. This makes historic investments in broadband infrastructure of $1.5 billion and creates a fund for ongoing investments for broadband infrastructure. This will have to go to the voters in November, and you'll likely see some information from us as we're working with our partners to have a campaign around this. So stay tuned for that. We started at $5 billion asking the legislature for that. So I can't, it was 1.5, but I can't be disappointed when many areas did not get any funding for their priorities. So really excited about that. And then that first one, Senate Bill 1238, really is an update bill to ensure that House Bill 5, the major bill from last legislative session, that the language aligned with federal requirements around speed, around mapping, how we determine where the gaps are, and adopt standards for who's defined as unserved, served, underserved, and unserved, which are three populations for how the feds are going to dole out the dollars, and at what point, at what times, there's priority populations. And so we just really needed that to be able to ensure that we maximize and leverage all of the federal money that is being awarded to us. Any questions about the charitable bills I talked about, as well as some of the digital connectivity bills? Check the chat box while we got some big questions, and I want to get to those. I realize there are a few things that are missing from this slide that did not transfer over when I was saving for my own notes, but I want to make sure we touch on, and it may have been raised. We may be able to touch on it with the question about okay. So you guys, I'm sure, have heard about the Death Star bill, which was House Bill 2127, that would preempt a slew of local laws, anything from regulations on construction, standards to payday lenders, bans on discrimination, hiring, housing, like you name it. This bill was so broad that it could potentially touch every area that local governments had previously had the ability to make decisions on in response to community needs, constituent needs. This bill, why I put it on your radar is because we have yet to really understand the true impacts and potential impacts could have on nonprofit providers partnering with local governments or prioritize particular health and safety issues. We just don't know the true full scope and true impact that this could have. So I wanted to put it on your radar because I think it begs a bigger question of, you know, we were just the first state to like pass such a broad preemption bill, but these proposals have been making their way across different states. And I'm seeing more and more nonprofits think about the role that they can play in these discussions. And while it's a little, it's very messy, not just a little messy, highly partisan, highly politicized, I think it's important for us as a sector to think about ways that we can mobilize around, you know, efforts to fight this big push for state preemption, because I think it's important foundations and for you know, major donors and nonprofits to really build civic power. And I think it's a kind of a larger value discussion of local control, you know, policy, you know, community leaders and elected officials getting to make decisions that are best for their diverse community. It begs at some of that, and I'm just seeing more nonprofits kind of engage in these discussions. So I wanted to put it on your radar. I will admit that United Ways of Texas did not take a position on this on behalf of the sectors nor our membership, but some of our members did actively engage in pushing back against this bill because it would impact some of their key priorities, such as fair lending and the banning of ordinances that aimed at keeping families housed, such as the opportunity cure, eviction, you know, eviction ordinances that many cities tried to put in place during COVID. This bill essentially bans all of that. And so it was a critical issue for many of our United Ways that have been leaders in some of those areas. So wanted to put that on radar. A number of other things did not make that on there, including this overall a lot of energy around pushing back against any diversity, equity, inclusion efforts, including the passage of Senate Bill 17 that bans colleges and universities from being able to have any programs or practices in place that are focused on DEI. That was another one that, again, we were trying to wrap our head around that. Our network was trying to wrap our head around that, but I think it is an issue that I know is very important for many nonprofits. You guys are more actively engaging, having that lens in all that you do, including in your resource development, in your HR, in your community impact work. You're having that lens in this many bills, including Senate Bill 17 that passed, kind of directly or in direct conflict with a lot of the priorities of our sector around that. So that is not on there, my apologies, but I wanted to raise that. And so with that, I just kind of wanted to sit with that. And there were also a number of voter kind of proposals that passed that make it harder, you know, for folks to vote. There were also some good stuff that moved, but to think about nonprofit sector, the importance of an interest in being able to kind of think through how we can respond to some of these issues. Anyone want to have any response to that and to these bills that I've talked about? Feel free to use the raise your hand feature or the chat box. All right, Chip, I'm going to take you off mute. Give me 1 second. There you go.
Thanks for addressing this. I think it's imperative that we really, start to collaborate. The politicized partisanship should not be an obstacle to doing what is in accordance with our nation's Constitution, Bill of Rights, traditional values, and of course, just basic, you know, universal principles across religions and ethical traditions. So it really does affect our sector. And I do think that there needs to be objective, fact-based, coordinated response back, you know, measured but firm, that, you know, is really going to be collective action at scale needed against these unprecedented intrusions on, you know, everything from free thought and expression and ability to shape identity development to voting and to, you know, as you say, DEI. It's sort of remarkable this is happening, and I think we need to recognize it and act against it, as you say, for the historic threat that it is.
Yeah. I saw in the chat box, Bill from Houston, that this hits close to home, being, you know, the ISD being hit particularly hard with the takeover of school districts by the state, and how, you know, decisions like that historically don't align with how we feel about local control. So yeah. Any others, any folks that are engaged on the preemption efforts, the pushback, any folks that actively push back against some of these policy priorities around diversity, equity, and inclusion, or voter, you know, bills that would, you know, make it harder for folks to engage in the voting process? I'm going to move on. I'll keep, again, feel free to use the raise your hand feature or the chat box, and I'll try and keep monitoring for questions. I'm going to move on to another big issue that I feel like is something we can't help but to, you know, have to think about, is health, given that many of our nonprofits in Texas identify themselves as, you know, kind of a health serving, health focused organization. I also, you know, think it's important that it's important to keep in mind that that, like, when we talk about health and positive health outcomes, it's more than just getting to the doctor. There are like these key, you know, social determinants of health: access to quality education, housing, workforce development, opportunity neighborhood, safe and supportive neighborhoods. You know, that while it may not be directly related to health, I feel like many of our nonprofits are hitting on those various social determinants of health in their own very specific ways that we can't help but think about. What are those key systemic issues around health, such as health coverage, that we need to keep kind of on our radar as advocates on behalf of the nonprofit sector. And so, you know, also given that health and human services is one of the major funding areas for our state budget, I feel like it's something we always have to prioritize. And I'm going to start with the good news, because we got to stay positive, that we were so excited to finally see the legislature pass House Bill 12 that allows new moms to keep their health coverage and keep seeing their medical providers, taking their medications, and managing health challenges for 12 months after giving birth. And this reflects a top recommendation of our state's maternal mortality review task force, and was a priority for our House leaders, including Speaker Phelan. United Ways of Texas was proud to be at the signing of House Bill 12, and really was, I think, so important, because we were so behind other southern states that have already implemented 12 months postpartum for moms on Medicaid. And now we're joining, and now we're the 43rd state to implement this policy. This policy that has shown to reduce maternal mortality and morbidity, which in Texas we have some of the worst rates, as well as the most disproportionate rates that are impacting, in particular, Black Texas moms. So we're really excited about that. Unfortunately, the legislature did fail to expand health coverage for low-wage workers and did not pass a key bill that would ensure more children who are eligible but uninsured were able to quickly enroll in Medicaid and CHIP. And unfortunately, the legislature also partially funded Health and Human Services Commission's request to support their eligibility enrollment workers. You guys may know these workers as the folks who dial 211 option 2, the folks that are only available 8 to 5, and help folks enroll in state benefits, including Medicaid, CHIP, TANF, WIC. The legislature only partially funded the agency's request for these staff, and we know these staff really are going to be even more burdened, have been more burdened with the unwinding of the public health emergency. That really we're concerned that families are either not getting, they're not getting their Medicaid renewals timely because of the lack of staff to do those renewals, and we're worried that many families and children will get left behind, that they qualify for Medicaid but won't actually get connected to their service as we go through this unwinding process. Any questions about health, any bills or budget items that you guys were tracking or interested in that you had any questions on? Oh, I love it. Bill said House Bill 12 is a big win. Yes. And we still rank the worst in health coverage and health outcomes. All right, another big issue area that is, a big issue area that I know is important to many of our nonprofits is education. I would say this issue, I could be wrong, but this issue suffered the most from the political twist and turns of the 88th legislative session. I feel like education got hit the hardest, including, the impacts on our Texas teachers and the 5.4, I think, million Texas public school students that those teachers currently serve. The legislature also missed the opportunity to really put direct funding into much needed supports for school districts, including student mental health. And they're kind of a bright spot, though, on the flip side, while pre-K through 12th grade education didn't get the wins that we had all expected and hoped, there was significant movement on in higher education with the passage of House Bill 12, which you guys may know. This is that historic piece of legislation that reforms how community colleges are funding. This was a bipartisan bill and creates a new model of funding for community colleges based on performance and outcomes, while also increasing college affordability and capacity. This legislation, along with some increased investments in the college system of about $683 million, means that the state will be able to better serve thousands of Texas adult learners and students and help them get them connected to high demand, I would say higher quality careers that puts them on a strong path for upward mobility, and most importantly will help ensure our employers have workers with the skills they need to address their workforce gaps, as we know is a huge issue in our state. It was great to see when we talk about nonprofit. There were a lot of kind of partnership, higher ed workforce sector partnership bills, but this one in particular touched on nonprofit workforce providers. House Bill 1755 was signed by the governor, and this supports educational institutions and nonprofit organizations that offer performance-based workforce training programs. And this is for those entities that also derive at least 40% of funding from non-state resources. This kind of provides an additional kind of incentive and funding opportunity for these partners. And again, is another attempt to better tailor programs to meet our state's workforce needs. Any nonprofits on the call today that focus on workforce, pathways to college and career, adult education? Just curious.
Little idea.
Oh, we got Capital Idea. Yes. Hi, Eva.
Mhm.
Thank you for all your work. You must be very excited about all the movement on all things pathways. Yes, it was really exciting. And it's clear, like, the legislature, they accomplished higher education. So, you know, from a strategic perspective, we really would, as you know, if education is important to your nonprofit and a critical piece of driving your mission forward, you know, that special session expected later this summer really will be the opportunity to continue to move education priorities forward. But I will say there'll probably be no appetite for anything related to higher education and workforce training, because because policymakers really do feel like, you know, they check the box. They had, you know, big wins. Something to know. All right. I also realized my slide on financial stability did not make it in, but I will kind of give you a little bit a debrief on that. Overall, we were really disappointed to see the lack of movement on those critical financial stability pieces, including affordable housing, access to transportation, basic needs assistance. We did have some wins on that, but overall, you know, we didn't have a lot of movement, and it was surprising given the fact that so many Texans families are struggling to make ends meet. You know, the high cost of living due to inflation, things are getting more expensive, that we just didn't see the legislature invest in or even move policies that would provide some more financial stability support to families move. We were excited that after many, many years of advocacy by Feeding Texas and Every Texan, that we were able to make some eligibility improvements to our Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, SNAP, in particular the vehicle asset test that has created a barrier to families being able to access this temporary nutrition assistance program. Because the values of cars have gone up, that has kicked many Texas families off of being able to qualify for SNAP. And we know that SNAP is a critical tool in really just keeping families' heads above water as they, you know, experience challenges or work towards their pathway to a more quality, higher wage job that often, you know, takes some steps to get to. So we were really excited that bill finally passed, and some other improvements that will ensure, and some other investments that will address hunger that many of our families in Texas experience. All right. Well, I wanted, you know, we got 20 more minutes, and I was really, before we talk kind of actions and more updates, including some federal policy updates that we have been tracking, I really wanted to open it up. I know this was a webinar, it was first a meeting, but I feel like we can still utilize this as a space to connect and talk. I'm just curious to hear, you know, what are some of the policy issues that you heard today, or that you've been tracking that maybe we didn't talk about today, that you are really interested in engaging on post the regular session and throughout the interim. And again, feel free to raise your hand and I can take you off mute, or you can type it in the chat box. I love it, Millicent. Priority is education. Oh, I'm just maybe making that up. Education and workforce. What are those key policy issues that you guys heard or tracking that maybe we didn't talk about that you guys really would like to engage more on post session? I may have to call on my friends at OneStar to get the conversation going. Oh, okay. We see some now, folks. Expanding Medicaid and access to healthcare, yes. Ensuring more low-income workers can have access to that. Chris, are there any particular issues, policy issues, even ones that we didn't raise, that we've even talked about, maybe didn't get any attention this session, that you hope to engage, dive deeper on?
Yeah, I think one, the state has invested in nonprofit capacity in the past, and they stopped that back in 2011. And so we would love to, the state, we all know, partners with nonprofits in so many ways to get the work done. And so investing in the capacity, ensuring that we have strong, healthy nonprofits, I think is an important thing the state could be doing. So I'd love to see us advocating for that in future sessions.
Yeah.
And anything that gets our Texans more engaged in volunteerism. Anne is asking, what would that look like? So there was a fund. It was called Renewing Our Communities Account. It was through the Health and Human Services Commission, and it funded training as well as small grants to nonprofits to do kind of infrastructure improvements, things that most grants don't always cover. So nonprofits were able to use it to increase their system, improve their systems, get new technology. Food banks were able to use it to buy large freezers, just different things that allow them to increase their capacity and ability to serve more Texans. It was called the Renewing Our Communities Account.
Great. Thank you, Chris.
Yeah.
I'll just jump to the next question. Are there any particular issues, you guys think the Texas nonprofit sector as a collective and as a whole are facing right now that maybe we really need to be thinking about doing a deeper dive over the interim on, doing some additional policy research on? And feel free to use the raise your hand feature.
How about the group thinking about how to actually invest in the actual nonprofit sector itself? So looking at maybe like a Texas retirement system program, maybe a some way to get medical, or you're able, if you're serving the community, you're able to get some kind of lower price or something. I don't know, just a way to invest in the nonprofit workers, and thinking about how, you serve in the community. Is there a way to figure out to support the workforce of the nonprofit sector? So I think that would be.
Yeah, healthcare has come up in every conversation that we've had.
Yeah, no, I think I think it's not a surprise, but a surprise, because we haven't talked about this, but I think again, it's such a critical piece to all of it, right? The access, the affordability, it's so crucial. And frankly, nonprofits can't and shouldn't, bear the responsibility of having, to cover Texans when we have federal funding streams that allow for it. We just have refused to take advantage of it.
Yeah. And another one that pops in my brain is you talked about the social determinants of health, or the non-medical drivers of health, what we do in Texas, and thinking of ways that we can, because there's an upstream problem. There's a referral that seems to be happening, but then the actual resources aren't necessarily available, whether it's utility assistance, whether it's, childcare. There's this, and so figuring out how do we bring more resources to the ones who are actually, providing the service, the direct service. So I think that would be one as well. Well, Ashley, you're on mute.
I want to highlight some of the great chat thoughts put in the chat, including Lisa. The vehicle asset test is only existent in a few states. Yes, we have still so much work to do in that. We make it as hard as possible to access these federal safety net programs, and also including TANF. We use TANF to fill budget holes, to not actually serve families. Last estimate I looked at is only 20,000 Texas households actually received cash benefits through TANF. We use the rest of our TANF dollars to fund child welfare, fund other programs that are not actually even workforce development programs. So yeah, really interesting conversation. How do we make it easy, easier and more equitable to access these safety net programs? Right. Okay. I am going to move us forward. We're going to talk. I see some already in the chat box talk about some federal policy. So I do want to, looking ahead, just before I move to that, I'm thinking about state policy, looking ahead. You guys know that, the regular session was just, and passing the bills was just the first step in being able to move these priorities forward. And so we will actively be kind of looking at the rulemaking process for some of these bills that touch on nonprofit sector, that may have a big impact on the sector, including some of the big issue areas that sector partners are leading on. Again, we expect multiple special sessions. And so I think this is an opportunity for us to be able to think through how do we build out our engagement strategies with this network. While there's still discussions happening and momentum, maybe there's a way we can think through how to keep you guys engaged in the interim. One way that I feel like we could really organize and mobilize and collectively come together to think through what's most important is through the interim charge process. This is a great way to put issues on the radars of our legislators before the session begins. And so every legislative committee will be open to taking ideas on what they should be studying during the interim. And United Ways of Texas always includes like nonprofit capacity related interim charges. And we could really use your advocacy this interim to actually get those picked up, because we haven't been successful in getting interim charge on the sector picked up. And so now that we have a network we could look to, we would really love to use our voice to move that forward. And often it's a great way to start having those discussions prior to session. You kind of did the education, you built the relationship with the office to then be able to, offer up a specific policy priority or budget item that will help move that issue forward during the regular session. And last but not least, I'm tracking a lot of state policy work, but there are some big things happening at the congressional level that I want to touch on. And I will admit that I'm not the expert on, so there may be others on this call who can help answer any questions and fill any gaps. But there are a number of bills that we are, that are important to us that we wanted to keep you aware of. So I'm going to stop the screen share and pull up the latest blog that's on our Texas Nonprofit Strong website that talks about some of these congressional proposals.
And then Chris, is your hand up? Just want to make sure before.
Chip.
Oh,
my bad, Chip.
Yeah.
Sure, Chip, give me 1 second. Go ahead, Chip.
Yes, thanks. This is a bit of a medium-term thing, but since partisanship is such an issue and polarization it's perhaps an educational, teachable moment and an advocacy opportunity that we could start working on now, that in 3 years we're having the anniversary of the founding of our country, and reminding people of what the Declaration of Independence and Constitution say about equality, about providing for the general welfare, working toward a more perfect union. I think that it really could be something that we could coordinate on to use as a tool, again, to get people a little bit more on the same page, starting now, but between now and then, to build consensus around reasonable policies that are going to be addressing some of these systemic problems, as well as alleviating the acute,
I really love that. Yeah, and you're getting a lot of a lot of agreement on that. I love that idea. And one thing I love about nonprofit advocacy, it's like really making the connections between those shared values. Like, we can always, I think that's what makes our voice so important and impactful in policy advocacy, is that we can find those connections and find a way to kind of move important and good things forward by really leading with our values and what's most important to us, our mission. We're mission driven. It's not about our own self-interest. And so I really, really love that. And Chris and Tiffany, I'm like, can we figure out who can help us with that?
I know that's
Our fund our
yeah,
partners.
Yeah.
yeah, I think that would be a great way to plan to be able to launch that of like, hey, let's revisit our values, what our country was founded on, and then
And some of our own Texas state values that are different than even others, neighboring states
yes, exactly.
that have seemed to have been forgotten.
Mm-hmm.
I love that idea.
Yeah, Chip, thank you for that.
You're welcome.
Chip wants to be part of the planning.
All right, I got your info.
Got you. Yeah. Anyone else who wants to be part of that? But we got your emails, so at least I like that he has put his mobile in there.
And that communications and messaging and framing is so important on some of these oftentimes it can feel very tough and complicated. And unfortunately, I feel like that is a capacity gap, that is a resource gap that many nonprofits have, but are critical as a critical strategy to advocacy, as a critical part of advocacy. I love that. Okay, well, now we just have a few more minutes before we wrap up. I do want to highlight, if you visit our website, that's where we provide some updates on policy issues, including federal policy issues. So I want to share my screen if I can. If you visit our website, and I will drop the link in, we have a new blog up, or new-ish blog, highlighting some of the policy discussions and energy at the congressional level. And I was really excited to see some specific policy ideas filed that relate to some of the issues that we have been talking. I feel like Chris and Tiffany, we've been talking years about, like nonprofit representation at tables, and any policy making decisions and resource decisions. So we were really happy to see the Nonprofit Seat Act filed that would strengthen collaboration between the federal officials and nonprofits, and ultimately better serve our communities, especially during times of disaster. If you visit that link that I included in the chat, there's a link to more about that bill. For those who would like to sign on, this is a great advocacy opportunity to sign your organization onto a letter of support for the Nonprofit Seat Act. I think Congress is in recess right now. I think this week. I could be wrong, but I think there's going to be some more specific pushes and energy in the next month or two around this. And so stay tuned, because we will absolutely be sharing information on these important policy priorities. Thank you, Dana. Texas Health did send a letter of support for the SEAT Act. Thank you. Any others? Would love to know if y'all included, added your organization to it. Please do. I know this may not be a priority for everyone, but we did include on our policy principles, encouraging legislators to think about technology improvements and modernization efforts to strengthen, information referral systems, front doors to community services, those connection points. And so we were, United Way Network is really leading and mobilizing around the HELP Act that will strengthen coordination between 988, which is our new mental health crisis line, our national suicide line, as well as 211, which is the most comprehensive information referral database of health, human, and social services in our nation. So this bill, the Human Services Emergency Logistics Program, or the HELP Act, was recently introduced, and so we'll likely be including this in any updates because this is something that hasn't been done before. Frankly, our United Way network has not organized well on before, and so we really are excited about the energy around really coordinating those front doors, those 3-digit numbers that connect folks to local services. And then I think like the Charitable Act, I feel like we have this has been introduced in Congress a few times post the kind of COVID and some of the tax changes. So we're glad to see that again, a bipartisan group of policymakers introduced the Charitable Act. And I want to say that there is a sign-on opportunity. I don't see it here, so I will make sure to find that and share it out with the group. If there still is a way to be able to raise your voice on this. I'm sure you guys have seen this in your own, looking at your budget, that change related to the universal charitable deduction and raising the standard deduction has had an impact on your giving trends. And then a critical piece to kind of health and well-being, and speaking of social determinants of health, SNAP is soon, reauthorization is soon underway. And so for those who are working in kind of the food security space, or this just really isn't, is connected to the populations you serve or benefit the population you serve, will likely also include ways that you can support, be able to move priorities related to SNAP reauthorization forward. So wanted to show you that. And with that, I'm going to, before we close, encourage everyone to visit our website that has all sorts of resources, including policy updates, our policy principles, our Built for Texas report that was done a few years ago that will soon be updated and refreshed. Look out for that. We just really want to encourage folks to visit our website, and we are really trying our best to be intentional about keeping that updated and keeping it as a source of information for our nonprofit sector in Texas. I'm going to stop sharing the screen and go back to our slide deck real quick, as we have some other take action opportunities I want to make sure I don't miss before we close. I think I may have covered it all, but if you go to that QR code right now, that will take you to the sign up page to be able to sign up for the Texas Nonprofit Strong e-news. I hope folks have been getting that and have found that useful. But if you've not signed up, just take your phone and that QR code will take you to the link to sign up. And again, stay tuned for a 2023 update to the Built for Texas data. Chris, Tiffany, any expectation of when folks can see that or have it in their hands? Any ideas?
We may have like a preview of it on the webpage, some of the highlights, but we're working on our own teams are kind of working on an update to the research. So I think by the end of the summer, maybe, I don't know if
Great.
we'll send if anybody has any other updates, but stay tuned.
And to keep y'all, make sure if you have to hit any other meetings, I try and get through this real quick. I will include a slide deck that has some advocacy resources and ways you can stay engaged in the state level policy discussions, including all of the work and efforts of our Texas legislature, or as I sometimes say, the antics of our Texas legislature. This will allow you to stay connected. And I just encourage you guys, I'm sorry, this is not an updated slide. We have a number of social media pages, including a new LinkedIn profile page that I will make sure that is in this updated slide deck before I send out to everyone as a follow-up to today's webinar. thank you guys so much for taking time out of your busy days to kind of get up to speed on all things policy and what happened this legislative session, and your interest in being able to use your voice to drive really important things forward as a collective group of mission-driven organizations. So thank you so much, and stay tuned for more ways and opportunities that we're going to be bringing the nonprofit sector together to really develop policy priorities to get well positioned for hopefully next legislative sessions advocacy opportunities. Thank you, everyone. And if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to myself or to Nora at OneStar Foundation. And with that, I'll leave it up to Chris and Tiffany to provide any closing remarks.
Just a huge thank you to everybody for taking time to join us, and please share as you get these social media pages or websites, share it with your friends that you think should be connected to Texas Nonprofit Strong.
Yeah, I'll just echo what Ashley and Chris said, and just know that we while we're leading this, we need a group of you to keep joining us. So spread the word. Let us know if you want to be interested. We're going to be expanding on this work and progressing on it. So stay tuned, because there's going to be opportunities to engage in this further. So look for those opportunities for our calls to action.